Some historical facts. King Jehoakim reigned only for 11 years until 598 BC. He was a godless tyrant who committed atrocious sins and crimes. He had incestuous relations with his mother, daughter-in-law, and stepmother, and was in the habit of murdering men whose wives he then violated and whose property he seized. The prophet Jeremiah criticized the king's policies, insisting on repentance and strict adherence to the law, but the king mocked and scoffed at God instead. Jeremiah prophesied that the king would die without a proper funeral, and when Nebuchadnezzar slew Jehoakim, his body was thrown before the walls without any burial. A king too proud for correction. When King Jehoakim read the first 4 verses of Jeremiah's Lamentations, he remarked sarcastically, "I am still king." When he came to the 5th verse and saw the words, "For the Lord hath afflicted her for the multitude of her transgressions," he took the roll, scratched out the names of God in it, and threw it in the fire. When Nebuchadnezzar became king, he instructed his master eunuch to bring some Israelite children, some king's descendants, and some of the young noblemen whom there was no blemish, strong and healthy, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who were able to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language of Babylon. They were given daily provision of the king's delicacies and wine, with 3 years of training so that they may serve the king. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 young men chosen from the tribe of Judah. The chief eunuch gave them names. Daniel was named Belteshazzar, Hananiah was named Shadrach, Mishael named Meshach, and Azariah named Abed-Nego. Belteshazzar means protect the life of the king. Shadrach means command of Aku, god of the moon. Meshach means who is what Aku is. And Abed-Nego means servant of Nebo, the Babylonian god of wisdom. Daniel made up his mind not to defile himself with food and wine from the king. He was no weak-willed adolescent. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods, but the chief of staff feared beheading if Daniel looked worse than the other men. Daniel asked the attendant to test out for 10 days a diet of vegetables and water on him, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Interesting to note, Babylonians were known to mix blood with wine. After 10 days, Daniel and friends appeared healthier and more well-nourished than the other young men who ate the king's food. To these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom. At the end of their training, these 4 young men exceeded their peers and were 10 times better in all matters of wisdom and understanding compared to all the magicians and astrologers in the kingdom. What we've learned so far. These 4 boys stood fast in their convictions and belief despite being indoctrinated and pressured to conform at such an impressionable age. They knew who they were and the set-apart life they were called to live. It was not easy to entice them with delicacies the world had to offer. They were relabeled with new names that worshipped other gods. How often does society attach labels on us? Are we convinced enough to know who and whose we are, not to believe the lies of the enemy? Standing true to God's commands, they were blessed with healthier bodies evident for all to see. Conviction and courage need to go together. Daniel had the courage to ask the chief of staff serving them food to do things differently. And a king or any high authority, example your boss or manager, is never above God or reproach. It is pride that will lead to downfall no matter how high you sit or how many titles you may have. God corrects in love. Conviction. The English definition means wavering mind or undecided. In the Greek definition, the word dipsuchos means a person with 2 minds or souls. When we are secure in who we are and whom we believe in, it doesn't matter how culture or society labels us. We become firm in our ways, not double-minded or confused, not easily tossed by the waves of opinion or pop culture. James 1:6-8 says, "But let him ask in faith, with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. This is a letter that Paul wrote to the church. Mind you, so this is directed to believers, not non-believers, not to be lukewarm in their faith. The believers in the church of Laodicea had grown rich and prosperous, and pride had set in. They were starting to be self-sufficient instead of God-dependent. They thought they were rich and dependent on their wealth, but God corrects them in love by saying they were poor spiritually in mind and could not see and had to stay connected to God and grow in Him. A reminder that the state of our wealth and status does not determine where we stand with God. You can have a poor man who is rich spiritually and a rich man who is poor spiritually. Do not let our eyes deceive us or think as the world thinks.